With Jamila Wideman, the new general manager of the Washington Mystics, which you have now. I was going to do the bit where, like, oh, you're getting used to that, but I'm like your 28th interview, so you're used to it. You're used to it by now. Your background is so fascinating. At some point in the future, we're going to sit down and talk about your dad and the academic and athlete that he was, and growing up with him, and then all the work that you've done away from basketball. But just to touch on that ever so briefly, to take this job in this moment, and I mean that as existentially as you would like to answer it, this job in Washington, D.C., in this moment, in this league full of activism and all of the amazing things that have happened in the W, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be in the seat. I can honestly say I didn't necessarily expect to be in the seat in this particular moment. But now that I am, it's pretty cool to have been part of literally the very first steps of the league in a moment when we had no idea if we would last a full season. And to be looking at it now, and in particular the last several years when there's just been an absolute explosion in almost every direction, is incredible. And I think that was part of the appeal of having the opportunity to come back. And I was mostly excited by the vision that was put out by ownership and by Michael Winger that saw this as a moment for the Mystics to imagine into the future, not just look backwards at our prior success, which is undeniable, incredible roots here in the franchise, here in the city, but to look forward and ask the question, where are we going next? Not catch up to now, but where are we going next? And that question to me was just one I couldn't resist.
When you think about that, I don't know how much you want to answer this, because if you tell everybody where you're going, then they know, and that's a competitive disadvantage. But so as best as you're willing to answer, like, where is this league going next? Because I've thought about this a lot. You have international influence. You have NBA influence more than ever. You have longtime WNBA folks that are both taking things that are at the root of the women's game that have been for decades, and also evolving tremendously. I think of Cheryl Reeve and her evolution in all kinds of different aspects. So how do you try to both predict, but also maybe not even predict, drive what is next for the league?
Yeah, well, I think, the league very much has a DNA that is evolution, right? Given its beginnings, and given that the players have always taken on a responsibility to not just be some of the best athletes in the world and not just be some of the best basketball players in the world, but have generally understood that they were a part of building something that was extraordinary as a league, as a game, but also as a space for women, for girls, for anyone to imagine themselves into, that you can be many things. The players in this league are marked by being incredible athletes, also incredible people, also with amazing passions that are off the court, that many of them are pursuing in incredible ways. Many of them are amazing advocates. So that multi-dimensional image of who a WNBA player is, I think is remarkable, and I'm very proud of it. And so I think of that as a very precious legacy to take on. And it feels like a lot of pressure to figure out what is that next going to look like. But I think the way I would frame it is, what is it going to mean? What can a team be for a community? What can a team be in terms of what integration with that community can look like, both in an intimate way in this city, in this town, but also more extensively. I mean, you have this remarkable moment where you have players coming to make this place a home who are from all over the world. What could we do with that idea, right? Like, where is home? Home is here. Home for Jade Melbourne is in Australia. Home for Ariel is here, and it's in Dallas. We've got these tentacles into so many different communities and spaces. So imagining, like, what can our impact actually look like there, I think is really exciting to think about. I think for me, there's also this aspect of building a space that promotes innovation and ideas. Also just might promote innovation and ideas that have impact beyond the Mystics organization or beyond Monumental. I think some of the most amazing work in women's health recently has come out of the opportunity to focus on elite women athletes. And those learnings, those gains, don't just benefit women athletes. They announce that it's important to have a special focus there, and they also create gains that are accessible to other people. And so that's an example, maybe more specifically, of a kind of impact that you might not reflexively think a franchise or a team could have, but they do, and you can make that intentional.
That's really interesting, because I think when I initially heard you and Michael and Sydney talking about that, I'm thinking about on the floor basketball. And that's why I framed the question that way, in terms of, oh, you probably don't want to give away, like, oh, we're going to shoot more threes or less threes. We're going to zigzag, like, but it really is that larger, like, even in, like, Michael's floating up here, right? He's got these big things, and sure, he is also a basketball person. That's not to say that he doesn't know the game or isn't involved in roster building or whatever you or Will on the Wizards side need. But for your, like, a general manager is super focused on, like, building the basketball team, but you're thinking about how that interacts as well, and then kind of what that means.
Yeah, and I think those are connected. So,
right. Well, can you, because, like, I think most people would listen fundamentally would, like, yeah, of course there's some connection. Can you lay out almost more from the basketball side? I'm not trying to just, like, push you into a basketball box.
Yeah.
But can you draw that connection for folks of, like, okay, this is how it then ultimately helps us win games, because 5 years from now, your record of the basketball teams and whether or not you're advancing on the court is ultimately going to be the determining factor of whether you keep the job, whether you're doing great things off the floor or not.
Yep. Well, I mean, I'll give a simple example of getting players who want to be here, right? If part of what players want is to be with a franchise on a team where they can see themselves growing in different ways over the course of 5 years that they might spend on a team, then our ability to show that we can do that here is a part of attracting talent. That talent becomes a part of our roster. That talent on our roster makes us a better team. That changes who we are as a basketball team, right? Knowing that players are picking up and bringing their lives here also means they're looking for home. So our connectivity to the community is beyond an event. Our connectivity to the community is about actually creating roots and grounding ourselves in the cultures that are in this city that inherently are cultures that are shared by our players, and many different ones, right? And so if we are able to actually be proximate to the neighborhoods, if we're able to be proximate to those cultures, to that corner restaurant, then we're also able to offer that up, not just as a part of the city, but as a part of something that's ingrained in Mystics culture. That too, incredibly attractive, not only to bring players here, but to keep them here. So finding those roots are connected to how players show up as performers. So I think one of the things we can mistake is that when we talk on court and off court, we imagine that this sideline is somehow a wall, that players are going to leave who they are, coaches are going to leave who they are, executives are going to leave who they are off the court, magically jump in and become something else. And the reality is athletes, performers all bring, it's a porous line, right? How we do on the court affects everything what we do off the court affects everything on. So if that's true for the individual, it's also true for the organization. So that investment in having impact and influence isn't separate from the basketball in that sense. We're creating a space that people can show up as the best performer that they can be. It's also about inviting innovation and great thinking into the space in a technical way, whether that's our data and analytics teams, whether that's our medical care and performance teams. It wasn't so long ago that teams did not employ massage therapists or sleep specialists. Well, with the current schedule, not having somebody that we can talk to about making sure that our players get the rest that they need, it is not only not sort of serving them as people, it's impacting how we're able to show up on the court as a team. So that kind of investment too, I think represents our on-court abilities as well.
So you have this incredibly large long-term outlook smashed up against this ridiculous reality that is the WNBA in 2025, leading into a CBA negotiation that is made for one of the most bizarre contractual situations a league has ever seen in any sport. So as you talk about building a team and think about that and jump into what, and by the way, kind of the last two things I'll hit on with you here, like you have that like very short-term thing, reality versus this long-term vision that you have. And you are also in many ways jumping on a moving car because not only do you have the middle of free agency, the the trades that could happen at this time of year, you're in the middle of the college basketball season from a scouting standpoint, but you're also coming into a place where Mike and Eric did a lot of that work. And I remember specifically talking to Mike at one point, and he's like, because of the schedule, we have like our W season, then we have our scouting season. And so we don't need to have two staffs in the way that an NBA team does where the seasons are happening simultaneously. So I imagine there's a bareness of infrastructure that you are walking into, a void of infrastructure. So how do you, I know, like basically like, hey, how are you going to do your whole entire job? Can you sum it up in like a nice, tidy 90-second to 2-minute answer? But like, how do you try to square those competing factors?
Yeah, well, look, the role general manager really, in fact, means you generally manage everything, right?
Yeah.
Obvious point, but like, we spit that title out as if it's, it loses its meaning. But being able to dance in all those spaces simultaneously, it is the job, right? But also knowing I can't do that alone. And to your point, we have another incredible competitive advantage here, which is that we are completely integrated with Monumental and we're completely integrated with the Wizards. And that's an incredible strength of the organization in the sense that we are not starting from ground zero. And I certainly wouldn't refer to the team and the staff and to Mike and Eric as not having stood on an incredible foundation. So we do have the advantage, and both in terms of people and process of being able to not only leverage that, but to imagine that partnership is truly a partnership and a collaborative one. And so I would say that's an incredible place to start for Sid and I to be walking in. And I think, to stick with your vehicle analogy, we are on two trains. There is the one that is revving up to jump into action on April 14th at the draft, and then we're going to play a season. And we're going to focus there. Having a long-term view simultaneously, I think, is about that extra pause that you take when you're making a decision about how you may organize staff or a player you might take or a system you might put into effect, and asking yourself, am I doing this just for now? Or am I doing this because I think it's a key ingredient to build on? And there'll be some things that you choose just for now, right? But I think having a check against that and asking, and how is this helping us with our long-term vision, is an important mirror to hold up.
Jamila Wideman, the new general manager. She'll be generally managing things at the Washington Mystics. Jamila, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Appreciate your time.